The blizzard had quieted by dawn, though the wind still clung to the earth like a wounded thing, scratching at what little it could reach. Margaret Ellings sat on the edge of her iron-framed bed, lacing up boots cracked from 5 winters too many. She hadn't slept, just lay there, waiting for the sounds of another day without salvation. The kerosene lamp flickered low. Shadows stretched long over the wood floor, snagging on nails that stuck up like teeth. Outside, the barn door creaked. She stopped. That wasn't wind. That was the hinge, half-rotted and stubborn. She knew it like she knew her own spine. Her rifle hung on 2 nails by the door, next to a coil of baling wire and a sack of oats she hadn't opened since September. She took the rifle, not out of fear, out of practice. When she stepped onto the porch, the snow came up to her knees, hardened and crusted from sleet. Her breath clouded the morning. She crossed the yard slowly, boots crunching, the barn looming ahead like a half-buried ship. The door stood ajar. Something had nudged it inward. She pushed it open with the muzzle of the rifle. Inside, among the stacked hay and rusted tools, a man lay sleeping, curled like a dog, wrapped in a black wool coat, his face hidden in the crook of one arm. A knapsack slumped beside him, iced over from the storm. Margaret didn't speak. She simply waited. The man stirred. His body was thin, shoulders too narrow for the coat he wore. A river of dried blood cut from his temple into his beard. He blinked awake slowly, like waking cost something. He didn't reach for anything, didn't speak, just met her eyes. "You lost?" she asked, voice like gravel. He looked around as if trying to remember the world. "No, ma'am, I'm exactly where I meant to be." She didn't lower the rifle. "That's so." He sat up, wincing. "Name, Isaiah Caldwell. You wrote for a husband. I reckon I'm what you got." The barn stayed silent a long time. Wind scraped the roof. Somewhere a horse shifted in its stall. "I never wrote for a husband," Margaret said finally. Isaiah nodded as if that was expected. "Well, somebody wrote for one, in your name, paid the fee, gave me this address. Letter said to come quick, said it was urgent." She stepped inside, shutting the cold behind her. "You been sleeping in my barn since when?" "Last night, couldn't bring myself to knock. You looked like you might shoot a man before breakfast." "You were right about that." He nodded again, wiped blood from his temple. "Got caught by some boys west of Dredger's Hill. Didn't like the look of me. Took my hat, tried to take more, but I bit the one closest. He screamed like a kicked mule. They let me go after that." Margaret watched him, studied the way he didn't lie with his mouth or his hands. "How'd you get my name?" she asked. He reached into his coat, slow, pulled out a folded paper stained with damp and mud. She took it, write it. The handwriting wasn't hers, but it was her name, her ranch, the old name, Ellings Farmstead. Someone had ordered her a husband without asking. She looked back at him. He watched her the way a man watches a fire, warily but willing to take the heat. "Come inside," she said. "You're bleeding on my hay." They didn't speak again until he sat at her kitchen table, steam rising from the chipped mug she handed him. The fire was small but hot. She stripped his coat from him, cut away the crusted blood, cleaned the wound with snowmelt and whiskey. "You run from something?" she asked. He didn't answer quick. Then, "Same thing as you, I expect." "I didn't run." "You stayed still long enough. That's the same thing." They sat in silence. She watched him cradle the mug in both hands, long fingers, black under the nails. "There's no need for a husband here," she said. "I keep this land myself." "Looks like you do, but someone thought you needed one. Or thought I was weak enough to marry one." He gave a small smile. "You don't strike me as weak, Margaret Ellings." "I don't strike you at all, yet." Something in that made him chuckle, then wince. The cut tugged at his skin. He stopped smiling. Later, after he'd eaten half a pan of cornbread and the last of her stew, he asked to earn his keep for the night. "Not asking for charity," he said. "You let me mend that gate out front, I'll be gone by morning. You touch my gate, and I'll know you're lying." "About what?" "About leaving." He stared at her, then said nothing. When she climbed into bed that night, the wind had died entirely. The sky was clear. The moon lit the bare beams of her ceiling through frost-lined glass. Somewhere across the house, she could hear him breathing on the floor by the stove. Quiet, measured. In the morning, he was still there, sweeping ashes from her hearth. By noon, he'd mucked the stalls and chopped the day's firewood, said little. Moved like a man who'd been raised to vanish into whatever work he was given. That night, he cooked turnips with the rest of the smoked pork. By the end of the week, she'd stopped asking when he'd leave. He never offered. But the letter, she kept it, folded it and refolded it until the creases weakened, until the edges began to flake away. She stared at the name signed at the bottom in a different hand than the body of the message. Agnes Ellings. Her dead sister. And that's when she knew this story wasn't beginning with Isaiah. It was beginning with a grave long grown over, and the quiet revenge of a girl who had once survived a much worse winter than this. In early February, the river cracked open beneath the ice and swallowed a mule from the neighboring ranch. Isaiah found the carcass the next morning, bloated and frozen stiff on the southern edge of her property, where the fence had collapsed under snowfall. He didn't speak of it when he came back, just rolled up his sleeves and rebuilt the fence, tying the rails tighter than she ever had. Margaret watched from the porch, arms folded against her ribs. He worked without looking toward her. He always did. By then, Isaiah had been sleeping on the floor by the stove for 16 days. He never asked for a bed, never touched anything without being told. He used her tools, her water, her soap, but sparingly. As if his very breath cost something, as if he didn't want to leave behind any trace she hadn't allowed. And yet the house had changed, subtle things. The back door no longer stuck. The roof no longer leaked above the pantry. The chicken coop had a latch again, and there were always 2 plates on the table now, not 1. Margaret didn't trust it. Not because he was a danger. She'd known danger, known the sound of boots crossing creaking floorboards while a father slept off drink. Known the sharp bridle of a man's wrist across her mother's cheek. Known Agnes's blood dried on wood and the silence that came after. No, she didn't fear Isaiah. She feared what quiet like his meant, the kind that came before the world shifted sideways. She waited for a catch, a lie, a demand. It came on the 17th night. He stood by the door after supper, eyes dark from the firelight. That name on the letter, he said. Agnes, she kin. She was my sister. Dead. For 5 years. Isaiah nodded, slow. I figured. Only when I got that letter it wasn't old. The ink hadn't even bled through. Paper smelled fresh. Margaret held still. The knife in her hand had just finished slicing fat from salted pork. She set it down on the table with care. Show me. He handed it over. She didn't need to unfold it again. She knew the words, knew the loop of the G in her name, the crooked slant of the capital E. She remembered Agnes's handwriting. She wouldn't have written this, Margaret said. But she did. She was dead. He looked down at his boots, then back at her. You ever seen a thing that should be gone but was? I've buried it. That don't mean it stayed buried. They stood in silence. Outside, the wind had picked up again, the kind that cut straight across a man's bones. Margaret stared at the fire. Her knuckles had gone white from clenching. She wrote once, Margaret said finally, voice hard. Back when she ran off, said she'd married into something new, said she'd never come back. I wrote her once after that, begged her. Nothing ever came back. Isaiah didn't interrupt. She was 15 when she left. I was 19. Our father, he blamed her for the crops failing, for the baby dying, for everything. He beat her bad the day she disappeared. I found her shoe in the dirt and blood on the doorframe. She never said goodbye, just vanished. Isaiah sat slowly, the chair creaking under him. They found her body outside of Green Junction. Winter of '89, throat opened, dress ripped. No one claimed her, no one but me. She swallowed and it hurt, like glass down the throat. The sheriff said she'd been walking east, that she'd been seen at a church fair the week before. Said she might have been a whore. I told them no, she was just a girl. Isaiah reached for the fire poker, stirred the coals. His hand trembled slightly. Why she sent me then? I don't know, but I know this house is haunted, just not the kind that groans in the night. He nodded, slow. And then, as if to shift the weight of it all, he asked, "What happened to your father?" Margaret looked him square. I buried him under the peach tree. Natural. Choked on a bone. Isaiah's eyes glinted, but he didn't smile. He never did. That night, she left the door to her room unlatched. Not as an invitation, as a warning. Weeks passed, March brought thaws and floods. The town priest, Reverend Case, came up the trail in his black buggy with his fat-lipped horse, saying he'd heard rumors of a man staying at Elling's farm. Not rumors, Margaret said at the gate, rifle in hand. Truth. The Reverend pulled at his collar. It's not seemly, a man and a woman under the same roof, unwed. We sleep on different floors. The Lord doesn't measure distance by lumber. He don't measure anything by your mouth, either. The Reverend flushed, and what of Mr. Caldwell? Isaiah was in the field, shirtless, swinging an axe to fell a dead cottonwood before it fell on the chicken shed. Margaret didn't answer. You should come back to church, Case said. The others talk, they say strange things, that you talk to ghosts, that your house has ill spirits, that you consort with. She stepped forward. If God wanted me on my knees, he should have sent me a reason better than shame. The Reverend turned his buggy around. That night, Isaiah brought her a jar of peach brandy he'd found in the cellar. She hadn't touched it in years. I think your sister meant to protect you, he said, his voice low as the fire. Oh, she's dead. Not always. They drank in silence, and when he reached to pour a second glass, she caught his hand. You're not who you say you are, she said. He didn't flinch. No one is. Then tell me the truth. He looked down at their hands. I was married once. She died in a fever. I buried her with a marker carved by my own blade. I rode west because east had nothing left but rot and guilt. I answered an ad for a husband because it was the first thing that didn't feel like dying. Did you kill anyone back east? He looked up. Only once, and he deserved it. She didn't ask more. The wind shifted again. This time it came from the south. And in it, Margaret thought she heard her sister's voice. Not calling, not warning. Commanding. Spring rose with rot in its throat. The ground softened first, wet and black underfoot, the way the dead smell when they surface too early. The peach tree by the southern fence blossomed in defiance, pink petals shivering against the wind like the dress of a girl standing in the wrong room. Margaret didn't go near it. Isaiah worked harder the warmer it got. He cleared brush, repaired the well pump, fixed a root cellar door that had rusted half off. He asked for no payment, and she offered none. But some mornings she'd find the stove already warm and the coffee poured. or see a bootprint in the muddy edge of her porch facing outward, as if he'd stood watch in the night. In late April, a letter came. Folded 3 times, delivered by a boy with no name and a horse too old for errands. The boy wouldn't say who gave it to him, just held it out and rode off, hat crooked and eyes full of something he wasn't old enough to carry. Margaret didn't open it right away, just stared at the envelope. M. Elling's farmstead. Same crooked handwriting. She waited until Isaiah came in, soaked in sweat from digging a new ditch line behind the barn. He saw the envelope and froze. His shirt stuck to him, dirt streaking his arms. Another. She nodded, same hand. She opened it with the blade she kept behind the sugar tin. The paper was stiff, fresh. Inside, a single line. You let him in, now you must follow. That night, Margaret didn't sleep. She lit every lamp in the house, sat with the rifle in her lap, watched Isaiah from the shadows as he paced the front room. He said nothing. Neither did she. But both of them heard the sound outside, the hooves in the distance, the faint clicking of something metal against bone. In the morning, a figure waited by the peach tree. A woman. Young, barefoot, dressed pale blue and too clean for the mud. She didn't move, even when the dogs barked and the crows scattered. Margaret walked out with the rifle across her back. But when she reached the tree, the woman was gone. Only a single footprint remained, small, pointed toes, the kind Agnes had. Isaiah stood behind her, silent as always. She's drawing you out, he said. She's dead. He shook his head, only half. They rode out 2 days later. North toward Dredger's Hill, where Isaiah had first been found bleeding in the snow. The land curved sharply there, hills rolling like buried bones, trees twisted in ways they shouldn't be. People said it was where wagon trains had turned back. Others said it was where girls vanished. They found the church on the 3rd day. A collapsed roof, stone steps, cross still standing though crooked. Inside, the pews were broken, scorched in places. Black feathers scattered across the altar like a murder half finished. Isaiah walked the length of it and said nothing. Margaret knelt by the altar, scratched into the wood. Forgive me, he came in a dream. He told me you were in danger. I wanted to give you something strong enough to stay alive. It wasn't signed, but Margaret knew the shape of the words. Knew the apology only a sister could write. A floorboard shifted. Isaiah turned fast, blade in hand. Not his axe. This was a narrow knife he kept on his belt, one Margaret hadn't seen before. A man stepped out from the shadows behind the pulpit. Older, white-bearded, wearing the collar of a reverend but none of the weight. His hands were pale, empty, his eyes dark and wet. I told her you'd come, he said. Margaret stood slowly, rifle ready. She trusted me, the man said, like all broken things do. Isaiah moved between them. Margaret's voice came low. You knew her. I baptized her, buried her, and long before that I claimed her soul. She was a child. She was willing. Margaret raised the rifle. The man laughed. You think you've buried your sins, but you've only fed them. Your sister came back to tell you the truth, and here he is. He nodded at Isaiah. And Isaiah didn't flinch. The man stepped forward. He's not what you think. He's the reason your sister fled west. She wasn't running from your father. She was running to him. Isaiah's face hardened. Margaret lowered the rifle slightly. That true? Isaiah didn't answer. His jaw clenched. The man smiled wider. They met in town. She was 15. He was 20, told her stories, gave her fire, and when she begged for more, he left her with child. Margaret turned. Isaiah was shaking now, not with fear, with something darker. I didn't know, he said. I didn't know I left. I was running from myself. She never told me. She wrote you, the man said. She sent letters, prayed every night. Then when she bled out in that alley, she cursed you both. Margaret fired. The blast took the man in the shoulder. He crumpled against the pulpit, blood blooming across his robe. But he laughed, even as he slid down the wall. She's with me now, he said. You brought him, she'll take him back. Isaiah stepped forward and drove the knife into the man's throat. The gurgle was short. Silence followed. Outside, the wind had shifted again. Isaiah didn't speak. Margaret didn't look at him. They burned the church that night. And as the flames rose, Margaret dropped the letters into the fire one by one, including the last one, which Isaiah had found in his coat, one she'd never seen. If he finds you, protect her. That's all I ask. Signed, A. They rode home in silence. Not as strangers anymore. But not as anything else either. Not yet. By summer, the ground was dry enough to crack underfoot, and the wind came warm from the west, smelling of dust and singed wheat. No rain had touched Elling's farmstead in 39 days. The well still held, barely. The peach tree bore no fruit that year. Margaret didn't step under its shade anymore. Isaiah walked a wide arc around it. They had spoken little since the church. Not out of avoidance, but reverence, like two survivors pulling breath from the same shallow cup. The truth had reshaped them. Isaiah was no longer a stranger, but he was no longer a man she could ignore either. She watched him from the window sometimes. Shirt tied around his waist, body lame from work, he moved like a man who knew he had one foot on borrowed ground. Quiet, dutiful, unclenching only when he thought himself unseen. She began to understand the kind of boy Agnes might have fallen for, and the kind of man time had carved from that boy's absence. But understanding didn't undo the blood. Mid-July, riders came. 3 of them, dusty, gray coats, black boots polished despite the heat. One wore a deputy star dark with old tarnish. Another had a scar across his jaw that shone silver in sunlight. Margaret saw them before they reached the yard, set her rifle on the fence post, waited. Isaiah came out of the barn, pitchfork still in hand. The lead rider tipped his hat. Elling's farmstead. Margaret didn't answer. The rider pointed a gloved finger at Isaiah. You're a hard man to find, Mr. Caldwell. Isaiah said nothing. His knuckles whitened on the fork. The second rider spat. Name's Deputy Reese. We got questions about a reverend dead up near Dredger's Hill, throat slit, church burned to ash. Margaret spoke. He tried to kill us. He's still dead. That means a hanging. We buried the bodies he didn't, Isaiah said. Ask the ground out there. It'll tell you. We ain't here to ask dirt, Reese snapped. We're here to take you in. Margaret stepped forward. You got a warrant. Reese grinned. Got something better. Fear. Isaiah didn't move. Margaret raised the rifle. That man steps foot on my land again. You'll see what fear tastes like. The third rider finally spoke, youngest of the 3, voice dry, a woman defending a killer. I buried worse than him, Margaret said, and they never got back up. Reese laughed. You think this is the end of it. Law's got long legs. We'll be back. You better grow wings if you plan to fly out of here, she said. They left with the sun biting their backs. That night, Isaiah packed a bag. Margaret came in to find him folding the last of his shirts, fingers careful on every seam. "You leaving?" she asked. "Can't have them circling you, not for my shadow. You think running ends it. It ends it for you." She crossed the room, took the shirt from his hands. "If you run, they'll say they were right. They usually are. You said you killed only once. Was it the Reverend?" "No." "Then don't lie like you're guilty." He didn't speak. His face had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that comes before the ground gives way under your feet. "Why'd you really come?" she asked. "Before the letter, before all of it." He looked at her then, and there was something naked in his face. Not love, not regret. "Ned, I was tired of waking up without reason," he said. "Then I saw your name." She stepped closer. The room held its breath. "You're not leaving," she said. "I should. But you won't." "No." They stood in the center of that kitchen like two wrong turns, finally crossing. Margaret reached up, touched the scar on his temple from where she'd found him, bleeding in the barn all those months ago. "Stay," she said. He stayed. In August, a fire tore through the southern fields. Started by lightning, maybe, or maybe by the same hand that had sent Reese and his riders. No one saw it strike, only felt the heat come up underfoot like the earth was punishing them all. Isaiah broke his ribs, dragging a heifer from the blaze. Margaret's palms blistered clean through from hauling buckets. By dawn, half the crops were gone, but the house still stood. And they did not speak of the fire's cause. The town offered no help. The Reverend's death still soured mouths, even among those who had hated the man. No one trusted a woman who kept a knife by her bedside and a man who wouldn't pray. Margaret rode to town once, 2 weeks later. Went straight to the post office. She handed the clerk a sealed envelope. "Where it going?" he asked. She gave him the name. Deputy Reese. No return address. Inside the envelope, a single sheet of paper. On it, a name. Elijah Tarot. The man Isaiah had really killed. Not a reverend, not a preacher, but a sheriff's son. Shot through the heart in Tennessee during a flood year, for laying hands on a girl who wouldn't stop bleeding. Margaret had found the name carved into a locket buried in Isaiah's knapsack weeks ago, after the church. He had never spoken it, but now it was sent. She watched the clerk stamp it, then walked out into the sunlight with her coat flung over one shoulder and a blood-stained bandage wrapped around her wrist. She no longer cared who knew what she'd done. The truth had already burned them down. The first frost came early that year. September hadn't yet turned its leaves when the cold crept in, silvering the fields like a shroud. The peach tree dropped its last green fruit in silence. Isaiah buried it without a word. Margaret watched from the porch, arms crossed over her ribs like she was keeping herself inside. That night the coyotes didn't sing. That was the first sign. The second came 3 days later when a lone horse wandered onto the property. No rider. Saddle still strapped, blood stiff on the reins, branded with the mark of the county marshal's office. Isaiah led it to the trough, but didn't unsaddle it. "Whose is it?" Margaret asked. He didn't look up, Reese. She didn't ask how he knew. They didn't sleep that night. Instead, they sat at the kitchen table, rifle and knife between them, a single oil lamp burning low. Outside, the wind sounded different, like someone dragging something through snow, though no snow had fallen. Just before dawn, they heard boots on the porch. One pair deliberate. Isaiah stood, took the knife. Margaret raised the rifle. The door opened. The man who stepped in was Reese. He was older, taller, wore a long black coat and gloves too clean for riding. A U.S. Marshal badge shone from his chest like a nailed-on truth. He didn't reach for his gun, didn't need to. "I'm not here for him," the Marshal said, eyes on Margaret. "I'm here for you." Margaret didn't blink. Why? He pulled a folded paper from his coat, laid it on the table. Her name in thick, typed letters across the top. A warrant. Murder, arson, harboring a fugitive. She didn't flinch. "Reese is dead," the Marshal said. "Body found outside Cross Hollow, throat opened, horse gone, your name written in blood on a scrap of his coat." Isaiah tensed. "I didn't touch him." The Marshal nodded. "I know, I saw the tracks, too small to be yours." Margaret didn't look at Isaiah. The Marshal sat without being invited. "Something's wrong here," he said. "Something that smells of old curses and half-buried bones. You're not the first woman I've followed out west, not the first who kept company with the dead." Margaret met his eyes. "You believe in ghosts." "I believe in grief that doesn't die right, and I believe in men who carry it until it curdles." He opened a second paper, unfolded a photograph. A girl, 15, pale hair, dress torn. "Agnes." "This picture was found in a preacher's journal back in Tennessee," he said. "Same preacher whose son died in a fire started by a girl he was meant to wed. That same girl ran, changed her name, wrote letters to a sister who stopped writing back." Isaiah's breath caught. Margaret didn't move. "She never cursed you, Margaret," the Marshal said. "She called for you every year, same date, same words, but someone intercepted the letters, that preacher, the one you killed. He hoarded them, prayed over them like trophies." Margaret's voice came like smoke. "Why are you telling me this?" The Marshal leaned forward. "Because I want you to run." "Why?" "Because if they send someone after me, they won't talk. They'll come for your blood, not your story." Isaiah stood slowly, then let them. But the Marshal raised a hand. "No, you both need to disappear. This land is marked, not by law, by the weight of the women who died on it." He reached into his coat, set down a map. "A cabin in the Bitterroots, belongs to no one, no trails lead to it." Margaret stared at the paper, then back at him. "What do you want in return?" He took a long breath. "I want you to make something new. I want the dead to stay dead." They didn't speak after he left. Just packed. By sundown, the house was stripped. Only the peach tree remained. Margaret stood beneath it one last time, touched the trunk, whispered something no one heard. Then she and Isaiah rode out, north. Years passed. No one saw them again. But sometimes, in the thaw between winter and spring, riders crossing the northern pass speak of a woman with hair like ash and a rifle at her back, and a man beside her who never speaks unless it's to warn. They live in a cabin that doesn't show on maps. The garden is small, but it grows. The house is silent, but it's warm. And sometimes at dusk, a peach blossom drifts across the snow, and neither of them ask how it got there. Because some names don't die. They bury themselves in the bones of the living. And grow.